Hello, and thanks for joining me. Today we're going to look at 3 short videos by 3 Christians, all of whom claim to have discovered a question that atheists can't answer. It won't surprise you to learn that I do in fact answer them, but what might be a bit surprising is that there's something to be learned about the mindset of people who pose so-called impossible questions. First, we'll look at a video from a channel called the Armory. The YouTuber appears to be a biblical game designer, something about teaching your kids apologetics. After reminding us of the story of Jesus and the money changers, he poses his impossible question.
An atheist comes up to you and says, give me proof that God exists. All you have to do is say, by whose authority are you going to determine the validity of the truth claims that I present to you?
By no authority at all.
The Bible is riddled with contradictions. By whose authority are you determining what is a contradiction? And by whose authority are you placing an obligation on me to live my life in such a way that I don't embrace contradiction?
By no authority at all.
The God of the Bible is a tyrant. How can you believe in such an evil being? By whose authority are you claiming that the God of the Bible is immoral?
By, once again, no authority at all. And yeah, he goes on like that for a while.
The atheist becomes the one who determines ultimate truth, what is logical, and what is moral. They make themselves God.
I generally do not determine what is true except by my own actions. I could not determine what logic is if I tried. A equals A regardless of what I, or for that matter God, has to say about it. Morality is a trickier subject, and atheists have wildly divergent opinions on the matter, but suffice it to say, I have nowhere near the requisite interest in termites, church revenue, or your sex life to want to be God.
16 verse 31. If they don't believe Moses and the prophets, the word of God, neither will they be persuaded if one rises from the dead. You can answer objections with the Bible, and if people reject that, well, they're rejecting the word of God. They're rejecting the ultimate standard of truth, the ultimate source of truth. So at that point...
Well, at this point you have a choice. You can work with me to determine who is right by logic and evidence, or you can keep mindlessly repeating, by whose authority do I do this or that? A gambit which, it could not be more obvious, is intended not to advance discussion, but to halt it in its tracks. The man is a presuppositionalist, it seems, and so I will treat him as I do all presuppositionalists. If coherent communication depends on God's existence, then since I will not grant the assumption that God exists, lest I beg the question, I have no reason to assume that he, the Christian, is speaking coherently. So with that in mind, let's watch the rest of his video. I think we've made our point, yeah? Another impossible question comes from Pastor Glyn Barrett, lover of Jesus and evidently caffeine. He also begins his video with a story, this time about himself. Note the 2 clean-cut gentlemen sitting behind him looking very impressed.
They said, Pastor Barrett, we would like you to come and get involved in a debate with all the atheists. I said, fine. They said, yeah, the president of the Atheistic Club, he will stand up and he will share for 15 minutes on how there is no God, and then we're going to give you 10 minutes to prove to us that there is a God. I said, bro, I don't need 10, I only need 2 minutes. So I went down, I won't tell you which university it was, but I drove to Cambridge, and when I got to Cambridge, I go into this lecture hall, right?
Would it surprise anyone to learn that there is no record whatsoever of this so-called debate at Cambridge? Would it further surprise anyone to learn that, according to Barrett's account, the Cambridge-educated atheist spokesman behaved exactly like every evangelist's worst stereotypes about atheists? I'll admit I'm not an expert here, Pastor Barrett, but how's that bit about false witness go again?
So I get up on stage and there's boos and hisses and all these sorts of things, and I said, this circle represents knowledge. Everything that could ever be known about any subject fits in there. I said, so that's what you do know? He said, yes. I said, and that's what you don't know? He said, yes. But this does exist, you just haven't discovered it yet. Yes. Therefore, could God not exist in a dimension that you haven't yet discovered?
No. Because even if God existed out there, his existence would have consequences in here. Consequences which we can observe. Like falling asleep on the beach, waking up and seeing a set of footprints in the sand nearby, you know that someone has been there even if you can't see them. One of those observable consequences would be, we shouldn't observe any pointless evil and suffering in the world. But we do observe that. That's how we in here know that there's no God out there. But that was really nice of that Cambridge Atheist Club to comply so thoroughly with your script, wasn't it? But now let's move on to a video from Science Pastor.
There is a question atheists can't or won't answer. It's a simple but necessary question. You say you've not seen any evidence God exists. What evidence would you accept?
Any evidence that is compelling. By compelling, I mean that once I'm exposed to the evidence and understand it, I'll have no choice but to believe that God exists. And before you start going off about free will, this is how all beliefs work. They're involuntary. We're either convinced by something or we're not, and if you don't believe me, try believing, just for a moment, just through an act of will, that London is the capital of France. You can't do it. You're compelled by the evidence to believe that London is the capital of England. So one possible example of compelling evidence for God would be an unmistakable miracle, such as the stars rearranging themselves into the shape of a crucifix. Another is a convincing set of proofs that the Kalam cosmological argument is sound. Yet another would be a direct communication from God into my brain. These are all just off the top of my head. If God exists, he no doubt can think of many lines of compelling evidence that I can't. He also knows what would be compelling to me in particular.
I've asked that question for 20 years, and in the very few times I have gotten an answer, it has either been unreasonable.
What's so unreasonable about a miracle? In the webpage that Science Pastor links to along with this video, he explains that God doesn't do miracles anymore because he wants science to keep working, which is a fair answer, assuming God for some reason values science more than he does, providing the necessary conditions for salvation. But as I've indicated, there are any number of non-miraculous options open to God.
Or the atheist admits that the answer actually would not change their mind. The real answer is they don't want God to be real because they love the darkness.
This is again clarified in the accompanying webpage, where he says that atheists are willfully suppressing truth. He says, quote, "Everyone knows there is a God. They are without excuse," end quote. So, once again, we can use the absolute defeater argument from my There Are No Atheists video. If God exists, everyone knows that God exists. But at least one person, namely myself, does not know that God exists. Therefore, God does not exist. There is no way to circumvent this argument. There is no way to escape its logic. There's also no way to convince Science Pastor of premise 2, but that's fine. He's perfectly free to live and die in ignorance. For the rest of us, God's non-existence is decisively proven. So now that I'm 3 for 3 with these impossible questions, here's what I've learned about people who pose so-called impossible questions. They're not interested in discussion. They're interested in carrying out a sort of platonic ideal of a conversation that's completely planned out in their own mind and ends with the atheist becoming a Christian, or else they just don't give a damn. There are few things more insufferable in this world. And for the record, I don't know of any atheists who have posed impossible questions for Christians, but I'm reasonably sure that if I was a Christian, such atheists would come out the same way. So think twice before using that gimmick, okay? If you like this video, please be sure to hit the like button, and if you want to see more content like this, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you have your own impossible questions you want to pose for me, go ahead and leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I'm David John Wellman, and the rest is up to you.